Hello and welcome to another episode of Your Retirement Planning Simplified. I am Joe Curry along with my host, Lindsay Wilson. How are you, Lindsay?
I'm great, Joe. Just gearing up for fall and for our client review season, and it's going to be a busy one.
Yeah, hard to believe we're there already. It seems like we just finished our spring sessions, but anyway, it's good. It'll be good to see everybody. It's hard to believe that summer has gone by and we've been talking about your play forever, and now all of a sudden you're free.
I am. It's
You're
all
not doing
done.
that every night.
Yeah, and that's right. I'm just here and focusing on work and everything that's coming up. So
Yeah, and I'm excited. Kids are going back to school and we can get back into routines. It's been a fun summer. I'm grateful for all the fun we've had, but routines are also good.
yes, they are. Can make you
Oh,
very productive.
yes, exactly. They keep me content, which is a good transition into our conversation today that I had with Brian Portnoy. And Brian, his company actually, they coach advisors actually on more the human side of money. It's maybe a good way of putting it. But funded contentment is kind of their aim or their focus. I guess I think the way they describe it is that's kind of their version of true wealth. And I think that it's really a great way of thinking about money. So I don't need to give it all away here in the intro, but it was a really good conversation about how money isn't just about having more money. So with that, maybe Lindsay, I'll have you give Dr. Portnoy's bio.
Yeah, as you mentioned, he's an expert in the psychology of money. He is the founder of Shaping Wealth, the global wealth industry's premier learning and training platform for human first financial guidance. He's also published 3 behavioral finance books, which have been translated into 14 languages. One of them, The Geometry of Wealth, inspired his current venture. He previously worked for nearly 20 years in the hedge fund and mutual fund industries as investor, researcher, and educator. And he earned his doctorate at the University of Chicago and an undergrad degree at the University of Michigan.
Awesome. I think that everyone will enjoy this episode. I think as soon as I finish recording it, I came out to tell you how much I enjoyed the conversation. So I'm sure our listeners will as well.
Excellent. Thanks, Joe.
Brian Portnoy, welcome to the show. How are you today?
I'm good. Good to see you.
Yeah, it's great to have you on. I'm excited to have you on the show. I read some of your books. I've seen you speak at some advisor conferences. And I just thought that you'd have some good insights that you could share with our audience today. So, like I said, I'm excited to have you on here. And with that, let's just jump right into it. So,
Sure.
one of the big themes I know you've talked a lot about is this concept of funded contentment and how it maybe differs from traditional views on financial success. So could you tell our audience a little bit about what you mean by that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, that's the anchor concept for what I write about, how I and my team speak with investors and financial advisors. So let me take a moment just to lay that out, because that's the scaffolding for the broader conversation. So, I always like to draw a distinction between being rich and being wealthy. Rich is the search for more. Um, the brain is hardwired to never really be that satisfied with more. There's a famous, I don't know if it's famous, but there's a line from that show Mad Men where Don Draper says that happiness is that feeling right before you want more happiness. That's kind of our approach to, our general human approach to more. We get more, and then, well, the only thing that happens next is the desire for more. So it's a bit of a treadmill. And it's not that more is a bad thing. It just doesn't tend to have the emotional outcome. Doesn't make us as happy as we think it will be. I contrast that with being wealthy, which I define as funded contentment, which is the ability to underwrite a life that's meaningful to you. So let me unpack that. The ability to underwrite a meaningful life sounds kind of heavy duty, but what the concept of funded contentment does is serve as a very, I think, simple but precise tool to help us reflect on the lives that we want to live. And then secondly, not first, secondly, ask, well, what are the financial dimensions to that? What funded contentment does for individuals or financial advisors or anyone reflecting on this is give a two-step process. Okay, so what's meaningful to me? And the way that I've written about it, that I think there's 4 deep sources of contentment in our lives. And that's sort of the starting point for maybe our reflection. And then once we've reached, some element of clarity on what's, important to us, what our values are, what's meaningful or purposeful, it's only then that we begin to ask, well, can I afford those things? What do they cost? How do I underwrite them? And maybe what I'm describing sounds really simple. The fact is, most people don't think this way.
Yeah.
Most people start with the money. They're looking at the stock market. They're sweating the bills. And those are all very normal emotions. They're not irrational. They're not bad. But what I'm offering is sort of a mindset for figuring out where money fits into a meaningful life. That is funded contentment.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I love that idea. Could you maybe talk to our audience a little bit about how they might go about finding that purpose, especially also thinking about, a lot of the people listening to this are either in or they're starting to get closer to retirement. And, a lot of them probably got purpose from their career or their business or whatever they're doing before retirement. So how can people start to explore this idea of finding that deeper purpose?
Yeah. Good question. And I want to caution against, I'm not encouraging people to, put on white robes and be philosophers or climb to the top of a mountain and meditate, although that's not the worst thing to do. But it is to, in your own way, give thought to the life that you want to live, to actually, which a lot of people do not give themselves permission to do because they're so caught up. And I'm guilty of this too, caught up in the rat race, kids, parents, friends, neighbors, work, everything. I mean, we live in very busy times. So, Joe, the framework that I rely on is what I call the 4 C's, the four sources of contentment. And there's an old line that all models are wrong, but some are useful. I have found this model to be very useful. Your listeners might say, elements of that make sense to me, others not. But in any event, what are the 4 deep underlying sources of contentment? They are connection, control, competence, and context. Let me take a moment to just describe those briefly. Connection is our deep seated need to belong. It's probably our most important instinct, that we want to be part of the community. It's just not a desire. It's that we were born hardwired to be tribal, small t tribal, not capital T political tribal, but small t tribal. We are born as social creatures. And, we could see now in North America, Europe, throughout the world, there's a global epidemic of loneliness that is quite upsetting once you get into the details. And it's just such a sad irony that in a time of advanced communications, social media, we're all quote unquote connected to each other in a way that we haven't been before. But at the same time, people feel very isolated. So having that source of connection is critically important. The second C is control. It's sort of the flip side of the coin. It's autonomy, it's independence. So yes, we want to belong to the tribe. We want to be loyal, but we also want to do what we want to do.
Yep.
We want to be free. We want to have lots and lots of opportunity. The third C is competence. And you mentioned briefly, folks in or near retirement. Competence is about our working lives. There's a really close connection between work, meaning, and identity. A lot of us, we're, in some sort of job or vocation our entire adult lives. And the work itself, the people we work with, those are very meaningful. And we know that when work's not going well, when you're not, when the job doesn't feel right, that, you've sort of lost something. And, we should probably click for a lot of detail in a retirement context, but a big challenge is that when people leave work, they leave one of their most important sources of identity. The fourth C is what I call context. And that is your sense of connection to something bigger than yourself. That could be faith, that could be place, that could be something else. Faith and place historically are the 2 big things. Religion, spirituality. Most people have some sense of, where they fit into the broader cosmos, a story that they have bought into. And we know from research that people who have the sense that there's something bigger than themselves tend to lead more meaningful lives. And then place is your hometown pride, your nationalism or patriotism. Those are real things in our lives. So connection, control, competence, context. You could say belonging, autonomy, mastery, and purpose, but instead of BAMP, I went with 4 C's. Might be a little bit easier to remember. And I'll just wrap up by saying that, you can spend, 2 minutes or 2 days, however you choose, reflecting on those 4 categories and really thinking to yourself, well, what matters to me? Because not everything matters in the same amount at the same time.
Yeah.
And so that's the starting point toward funded contentment. It's exploring the contentment piece first and kind of holding back on the financial questions until you sort of get to a good place on the first part.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. And you're right. I think a lot of people don't give themselves the time and space to have these conversations with themselves or their partners or whatever it is. So one of the things that we do with it when a client starts working with us is we have like a values exercise, and it's really interesting when people, when they take that seriously and actually take some time and effort to put into it, they realize, there's a lot of things that maybe intuitively they kind of knew about themselves and their partner, but they hadn't really fully thought out. And that process often leads to decisions that they weren't even planning when we start getting to the goals part of planning, I guess you would say.
Yeah, it's an important point, probably more profound than people might realize, because I think we immediately want to go to the to goals. Okay, you either you yourself or in an advisory context, it's like, okay, well, what are we planning for? And the traditional response is, well, we're planning for retirement. That's the number one financial goal. We want to work for the 30 or 40 years until we have enough money to not work anymore. And then, we have X amount of dollars, and then we withdraw a certain percent every year, and that cash flow covers the life that we want to live. And you kind of hope that it works out. But when you scratch the surface on the psychology of goals and goals formation, you actually can see that it's quite complicated. On the one hand, goals are a really good thing. In fact, they're essential. A life without goals feels pretty empty. You got to be working towards something.
Yeah.
The flip side of that, though, is that achieving our goals doesn't tend to make us as happy as we think it does.
Yeah.
And even if we feel positive emotions when we've crossed the goal line for a particular item, that good feeling doesn't last as long as we think it will. And what psychologists will call that technically is hedonic adaptation. Is that you get to that good place, but then you want the next thing. And this is actually a very big problem in a retirement context, especially for men, to be honest. That's what the research shows, who will work 40 years or so, and they've done everything right. And, on the one hand, we're blessed now with longevity. So instead of living to 78 or 82, we might live to 89 or 95 or beyond. So our lifespan and our health span has expanded considerably. And so people get to the age of 62, 65, and they actually have 30 years to go. And so they've done all of the right things financially in the technical sense. But then they ask themselves or their partner or their financial advisor, like, okay, but like, what's next? And you actually see a spike in levels of anxiety and depression among retiring men as a result.
Yeah, for sure. We've definitely seen that. And what would you say to I guess, someone who's about to, or they've just retired, they've saved more than they need to because they've been good with their finances and just been chugging towards that retirement, thinking that that's what they're supposed to do. But then when they get there, and let's say they pull the trigger to retire, they have a hard time now spending all that money that they saved up because they've been in this savings mindset forever. And they're worried that now they might run out of money. And so I'm shifting gears a little bit.
Yeah. Yep.
But just curious to your thoughts on that.
It's a good question. Actually, at Shaping Wealth, my company, we've done research on this, published a couple things. that we call scared to spend. Because, Joe, what you're pointing out is much more widespread than I would have thought, going back a few years, until, just talking to many financial advisors, around the world. And it ends up that underspending in retirement is a really big problem.
Yeah.
And, let's unpack that. I think it's pretty straightforward, kind of what's happening. You know, some of us, hopefully many of us, are disciplined with our finances. We don't overspend during our working years. We might not have a budget per se, but and we do some nice things, but we're not going overboard. And so, we build up like a habit, like a mental muscle memory over decades, that what we're supposed to do is be conservative, be frugal, don't live beyond your means. And well, you wouldn't want it otherwise, because, the opposite isn't particularly good. And so, retirement comes 60, 62, 65, 67, whatever the age is. And that muscle memory doesn't go away.
Yeah.
And so you've built this nest egg that can be substantial. And you look at like your monthly cash flows and monthly expenses, and the size of your portfolio is actually increasing in retirement, not decreasing. I think one of the most underappreciated and truly emotionally scariest elements of our financial lives is pivoting from the accumulation to the decumulation part. And like just the idea of seeing your nest egg of a half century of hard work and commitment to your family begin to shrink. That's really hard. Like I'll be there at some point, and I've already thought about the fact that that's going to be a difficult thing. There's a certain existential dread that I think comes along with that. The silver lining, and whether this on your own, but especially, I think it's especially actionable when you're working with a financial advisor, is to, number one, have transparency and simplicity in your finances, knowing what you own, what you owe, having, a clear and updated financial plan so that you sort of know what you want to do. And there's a lot of details to unpack there. And then to be able to contextualize and appreciate that your sort of incremental increased spending in no way diminishes sort of your sense of safety and security, because that's what's really being triggered here.
Yeah.
We are very, from an evolutionary point of view, we are creatures who are finely tuned to danger, and not just physical danger, but psychological danger. It's no less real than physical danger. And when we feel that decumulation phase begin to accelerate, we get scared, whether we want to admit it or not.
Yeah.
A well spelled out plan can point out, like, you know what? You can gift the kids and the grandkids with no diminishment in your sense of safety and security. You can participate in the community. You can take not one trip, but 2 trips. You can put the extra room on the house, whatever it is, making up a ton of examples. But, there's actually a win-win scenario in there if it is part of a coherent planning process.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. And I'm talking about having the plan and working with the advisor. I can think of one client in particular when they came to us. They're very, very smart, doing all their own planning for their entire lives. They had built up a really good sized nest egg, so done all the right things. They didn't really need an advisor from a technical aspect. But after working with them for a couple of years, what they've told us is one of the things they appreciate the most in working with us is that they actually feel a lot safer spending their money now, right? Because they have that plan and they know what they can safely spend.
What I love about that example is that it highlights the value of the financial advisor beyond the X's and O's. I'm of the very strong belief that the modern financial advisor plays 2 roles in clients' lives as mechanic and guide. So you are a technical expert with expertise in insurance, investments, estate planning, taxes, selling a business, lots and lots of technical skills that, take work to acquire and practice and maintain. But the other element, the guidance piece, is so critically important in the sense that, as a mechanic, as I'm using the term, you can build the vehicle, the engine's running perfectly. No one's really asked if we're heading in the right direction. And that's where the guide steps in and says, hey, what path are we taking here? And the example you just gave was one of you as a kind of a thought partner, a thinking partner. You probably don't have to tweak the client's allocation between stocks and bonds in some sort of complicated algorithmic way. No, the portfolio is probably just fine. It's the other questions about money that are more deeply emotional, which is where I think the modern advisor really makes his or her mark. And I think that realization is just dawning on the modern wealth industry in a way that I'm really excited about. I think that the moments where a client feels seen and heard and can talk about things that they are uncomfortable with, and money is our most uncomfortable topic. There's lots of survey data to show that, more so than death, religion, politics, divorce. Money is the number one most uncomfortable thing.
Yeah.
When you meet with the advisor and talk about things that you're probably not talking about with anybody else in your life, that's an opportunity for validation and permission and a whole set of experiences that can change the quality of life.
Yeah, absolutely. So speaking about advisors, how would you, so someone listening to this who is not working with an advisor, or maybe they just have an investment advisor, something like that, what advice would you give to them when they're looking for a new advisor? What should they be looking for?
It's got to be someone that you're comfortable talking to. I mean, it's one thing to have an investment advisor in the narrow sense. Hey, I've got a portfolio and I want to make sure that it is properly allocated to some mix of stocks and bonds, if we're, talking about a traditional portfolio. And, there might be some discussion of goals, and there can be some cash flow modeling to make sure that you're going to achieve those goals. But, money is a much deeper source of stress and anxiety, but it's also a source of hope and excitement. And, to figure out, one life change after another, the various disruptions that we experience in our family life, in our work life, in our social life, most of which have a financial component to that. To have a thought partner, really to think of a person as a financial coach who is not telling you what to do, but is willing and able to share best practices on making good decisions, on forming the right habits. If you could find someone who you, at a very fundamental level get along with, can feel like you can trust, it in some ways it's no different, Joe, than finding the right medical doctor.
Right.
Someone that you're just comfortable with talking about some of the more intimate elements of your life. And the parallels between physical and financial well-being are quite deep.
Yeah, that's great. I couldn't agree more. Switching gears again a little bit, and this might apply, well, it could be applied to anyone, whether they work with an advisor or not, but you've talked about some of the cognitive biases that could potentially impact someone's financial outcomes. So if we know what our purpose is, and now we can work backwards to what we need financially, what are some of these biases that could affect our plans?
Yeah. So first thing I want to do is challenge the word biases or bias,
Okay.
which I myself will use at times. And, there's a literature known as, or a whole discipline known as behavioral finance, which is a fancy term for the psychology of money. Mm-hmm. And some of that, research and some of those ideas are around, quote unquote, behavioral biases. And it's hard to use the word bias without having a negative tone or connotation. I like to really think about, well, from an evolutionary point of view, over the many thousands of years, the many millennia, It's been that, we've sort of evolved as humans. How have our brains, how have our bodies evolved in a way to adapt to a dangerous environment? Because, stepping way back, Joe, like, we are not particularly strong or fast. We don't have claws. We don't have fur. Like, you go out in the wild, like, we're not, the wolf or the bear is going to get you. We don't have a lot at our disposal other than our big brains. And the brain has adapted in a variety of ways that has allowed us to not only survive, but thrive as the most dominant species on the planet by, you know, uh, by a wide margin. Those adaptations, which we could also swap in biases, but those adaptations are what make us, like, truly survive and thrive. So what are some of those things that have come along the ride with us? One of them is, it's probably one of the biggest ones, is loss aversion, was what it's known. And this is simply the idea that bad is stronger than good, meaning that losses are more painful than gains are pleasurable. So if any of your listeners have gone to a casino and you go and you win a few $100, you're probably pretty happy. That's cool. Hey, go with the wife or husband for a nice dinner, or, buy the kids something or whatever. But if you lose a few $100, you're kind of like, you feel pretty crappy about it, and you feel more, you feel worse about $100 loss than you feel good about $100 gain. In fact, psychologists have set the ratio at about 2 to 3 times. So a $100 loss feels twice as bad as a $100 gain feels good. Well, why is that? Well, think about it in an evolutionary context. You only get one. You have to survive every day. You can't lose more than once, and so anything that is painful, either physically or psychologically, is something that we're going to pay more attention to. We have an incredibly fine-tuned sense of danger. Again, not only physically, but psychologically. And so we are going to be averse. We're going to be loss or risk averse. That impacts the way that we invest. It impacts the way we save and spend. Speaks to some of the underspending that we were talking about earlier in a retirement context. So loss aversion is a really big thing. Another big thing, and by the way, there's like dozens and dozens of these adaptations that we could go through that we're not going to. So I'll just give you one more, and that's what's known as confirmation bias. And this is the idea that we seek out information that confirms what we already believe. And why would that be? It's because uncertainty is almost like physically painful. Like, you have an idea of the way the world works, whether it's in your workplace or at home or in a political context or in a social context. And hey, this is what I've come to believe, and we'll just kind of take that for granted. And then you're confronted with a data point that's completely at odds with what you believe. There's a very high chance that you're going to reject that. At the same time, if you find another data point that is in line with what you believe about the way the market works, the way politics is a big area for this, something that you're building at work, in terms of a process or a product. When you get that piece of information, that story, that anecdote that comports with what you've already believed, you're like, yep, I'll take that. That's that sounds good to me. It physically feels good. So, just like loss aversion might lead us to not take enough risk in our portfolios because we're so concerned about loss, confirmation bias can keep us quite sane. And that's a really good thing. It allows us to get rid of a lot of information that might sort of undermine our mental stability. The downside is that sometimes the facts of life change. And if we don't change with them, our portfolio can be mismanaged or mispositioned. Our financial plan cannot be, tuned up properly. These are elements of normality. These adaptations are just part of normal human existence, and we don't want to pathologize these normal human adaptations, but we want to be very aware of them. This is actually one place where I think you know this. I'm just a huge advocate for folks having a financial advisor, having that outside voice, that outside perspective, and being able to sort of, articulate what's being observed, what behavior is being, pursued. It can be really powerful, because I'll wrap, this comment by saying that, the inventor of behavioral finance, Danny Kahneman, was quick to say over a half a century career that even though he literally wrote the book on this topic, he himself is not in any way, shape, or form immune from these adaptations, these dispositions, these biases. You need that outside perspective. You need kind of a third party to kind of keep you on track.
Yeah, no, I think that's really good. And in this world that we live in, where there's so much information online, right? It's from a confirmation bias standpoint, it's very easy to confirm any adaptation or any bias or any thoughts that you already have.
Yeah, it's getting worse. I mean, it's a little bit hard to measure, but it feels like it's getting worse. Maybe that's me expressing confirmation bias. But there's no doubt that in terms of communication technology, social media, sources of information, amounts of data and choice that we have at our disposal, I don't think there's any question that we have more than ever. More choices, more data, more information. And, it's not clear that the brain was wired to process all of this in a
Yeah.
particularly effective way. And as a result, we kind of go on tilt. And, this disposition to confirm what we already believed is sort of at max level when you've got so much coming at you, because you're like, I can't deal with this. I believe what I believe. And hey, if here's a confirming story that comes across the transom, great, I'll take that. But hey, a bunch of contradictory stuff where I've got to change my mind. Changing one's mind is really hard. Change generally is hard for humans.
Yeah, it's kind of that, like, Dana Kahneman was referred to as like that level 1 and level 2 thinking or whatever, like wherever we can get by on that surface level thinking, putting things together quickly without having to work really hard to figure something out.
Yeah,
Our brain's automatically going to do it, right?
Yeah, system 1, system 2.
Yeah,
System
that's
1
right.
is sort of the subconscious mind at work. It's 99 point something percent of our daily brain activity. We're not aware of most of the things going on in our own mind. And, we're processing an enormous amount of information through all of our five senses and somatic, responses to the world. So we're bringing in just gobs of information, and that is mostly subconscious and just getting on with our day. If we had to, there's all these estimates over how many thousands of decisions we make on a daily basis. But the fact is, my decision to sit up straight in my chair, or to lean into the microphone, or go freshen up my coffee after this call, or whatever, if you really stopped and thought about every single decision you make, you would be paralyzed. And psychologists have a term for this. It's called decision fatigue, and it's real. You can almost, you go to a restaurant that has one of those mega menus,
Yeah.
and it's like, people chuckle about it, and it's like, here in Canada, you have the Cheesecake Factory.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't know how global the Cheesecake Factory is, but it's like a 37-page menu with like 400 choices. And what's the first thing that everyone does? You sit down, you open this thing, everyone starts it's almost like a nervous laugh. Like, what the heck am I supposed to do with this? And so you end up just like, all right, well, I just want a cheeseburger. So you find that, but you're not like processing all of it. You can't. So, yeah, we're pretty amazing. Like we're the dominant species on the planet for a reason, but there are real limits. Like there's a hard ceiling on how much stuff that we can process.
Yeah, for sure. Now, you mentioned obviously we're the role of a financial advisor or thinking partner. Is there anything else that people can do to help them mitigate those adaptations and make more rational, evidence-based decisions?
I think there's at least a couple things, and these are sort of big pools to wade in and explore. But I'll just kind of mention them. The first is transparency. I think maybe the hardest part of financial planning and personal finance is the paperwork. It's just knowing like how much do you make, what do you own, what do you owe, like for me, most of us have pretty complicated lives and our finances can be kind of complicated. So sometimes we don't want to know because knowing can be maybe not the happiest of moment, but there is an element of courage and vulnerability in just having a crystal clear, you know, set of balance sheet and income statement. If you think about your family finances in kind of corporate terms, so that actually is hard work, not only to get going, but you're the financial planner. I'm not. You know that information, those perspectives have to get updated all the time.
Yeah.
And the one thing we know about a financial plan is that it's going to be outdated, right around the time the ink dries on the plan. And so planning is a verb, not a noun.
Yeah.
So the transparency, I'm conflating two things. One is the transparency. The second is I'm pivoting into the adaptive mindset, the mindset that, sort of in physics, it would be entropy, that things fall apart, things change. And so you make your plan, the market happens, there's changes at work, family members, need help, whatever the case may be, but recognizing that you're sort of never done and having that adaptive mindset can be very healthy. The third thing I'll just mention quickly is that we tend not to have a very clear personal relationship with our own money story. And what do I mean by that? We were all kind of acculturated from very, very young age as infants to have a certain relationship with money, just as we would have a relationship with our parents or our friends or God or you name it. There is a relationship with money that is unique to each of us. Where did you learn about the concept? When did you start making money? What did you learn from that experience? What were your first major purchases? Who influenced you? Who did you influence? And I could list out, 99 questions on how to unpack your money story. It is such a deep and emotional and intimate life experience, more than we want to admit, more than we want to really explore. If you think about our physical journey, our spiritual journey, our emotional journey, we're probably more honest with ourselves about those. Those aren't easy things.
Yep.
I think money's the hardest. And so unpacking what one's money story is can actually lead to self-awareness, which in turn produces the courage to do the things like have a transparent financial plan where you see the good and the bad on the same page.
Yeah. No, that's great. That's great. So maybe one more thing around money and finances for retirees is, you mentioned this earlier to kind of high level, but could you talk a little bit more about why you think it's important that people simplify their financial situation or their finances?
Yeah. There's something pretty straightforward about it in that, if there's a mess, if you want to clean it up. And also, referring back to this idea that, we live in a time of overwhelming information and choice. And, choice feels like a good thing. It is a good thing. It's an expression of our autonomy, of our independence, of our freedom. But we also know from modern psychology that there's something known as the paradox of choice, which states that more choice is good up until a certain point, and then paradoxically, it reverses, and we can become overwhelmed and paralyzed by, joking about the Cheesecake Factory menu before, but there's more profound forms of choice overload and decision fatigue. So, simplicity allows us, our brain, to find clarity and in turn purpose with the things that we're doing. If any of your listeners are, Greek mythology fans, I'll refer to the myth of Sisyphus, the guy who was forced by the gods to push the rock to the top of the mountain for eternity. And right as he got the rock to the top of the mountain, it rolled back down, and then he had to walk back down and push it back up. And this is sort of a form of torture. Our relationship with simplicity is sort of like that. Think about cleaning up your house or your office, and a week later, you're like, wait a minute, where did all this mess come from? So simplicity is actually part of that adaptive mindset. And I do like to talk to advisors and normal folks, not so much about simple, but simplification, the verb, the process of really understanding what it is we have, what it is we want to do, who it is that we want to be, appreciating two things. One, that moment of simplicity is probably going to feel pretty good because it gives us a sense of control. And number two, that it's going to fall apart in some way tomorrow or in a week or a month or a year. And we're going to have to sort of try to get back there. So having a clean, simple set of financial books and a clean, clear financial plan really does help underwrite, sort of peace of mind, which is ultimately what many of us want.
Absolutely. All right. And on a somewhat unrelated question, what we've been talking about so far, I just want to end off on this. Yeah. You and Josh Brown put together the book, How I Invest My Money. Finance Experts Reveal How They Save, Spend, and Invest. Can you tell our listeners maybe two things, what the most surprising thing is that you learned from that book and what you found most helpful or eye-opening from the other contributors that were part of that?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, that was a fun project. And, the idea was Josh had, who's a very prominent person in our industry, had written a really good blog called How I Invest My Money. And it was literally that, and it wasn't just, oh, well, here's the stocks and the bonds, and here's my home, and here's some investments in friends' companies. It was also began to touch on the why, to your point about how you go through a values exercise with your clients. It began to tap into values and purpose and meaning, and it was really well done. And, so he and I kind of had the idea of, well, let's get a group of financial experts together to write similar essays. So we put together this book of 25 relatively short essays. Christine Benz from Morningstar, Morgan Housel, prominent writer, 25 in total. The most surprising thing for me was seeing that even though these are all quote unquote experts on money, almost none of them had ever written down what money means to them. So let me connect that back to the money story comment I made a few minutes ago and why it's kind of important to get in touch with, like, how did you even get here? What are your beliefs about money? How do those beliefs about money connect to your larger belief system in life? I was really struck by how many people in the project, and I had these kind of, behind closed doors conversations that were really interesting where, big time experts said, wow, this was pretty uncomfortable. And now, I run this coaching and content company. We work with advisors all over the world on their money stories. And I guesstimate something between 80 to 90% of the hundreds of advisors we've worked with so far in their money stories have said that they've never once written down what money means to them. And when we, do these guided exercises, the consistent refrain is, ooh, that was hard. That was uncomfortable. But boy, am I glad I did it. Because if we think about how we want to treat others in terms of being empathetic, being better listeners, really understand where others are coming from, self-awareness is the engine for empathy. And the more we get in touch with ourselves, the better it is we can connect with others. And at the end of the day, in a human to human world, we want to deepen those relationships. We want to deepen connection. And that could be between advisor and client. It could be between husband and wife. It could be between parent and children. It could be friend to friend. But, back to our 4 C's, coming full circle, what's the first C? It's connection. It's that deep-seated need to belong, to feel like you are part of a community or a group. So, that's I guess that's the main observation and takeaway. To your other question, I would comment that we asked the question of everybody, how do you invest your money? Without any prodding or instruction, what everyone ended up writing was why I invest my money. It wasn't, I've got a 63% allocation to, US stocks and a 24% allocation to Canadian stocks. And then I've got, this exposure to fixed income. No one sent us a spreadsheet. What everyone ended up doing somewhat naturally, because we are natural storytellers, was lean into the why of it all. And one chapter in particular really stood out. It comes to mind immediately. My good friend Bob Seawright, who's an amazing writer and financial advisor, he wrote his entire chapter only about a home that he owns in upstate New York, where he and his kids and grandkids convene every summer. And his family generally has gone there for many, many decades, going back to his parents. And it was just a beautiful story about a house. He didn't mention stocks or bonds. He didn't mention budgets or savings plans. He didn't talk about insurance. He certainly didn't talk about taxes. His chapter was about a house and why it was important that he bought that, or whatever the arrangement was, and why it has been and will remain the centerpiece to the love that he feels for his family.
Amazing. Very cool. All right. On that, that's probably a good place to end, I think. But before we sign off here, Brian, what are you up to these days, and how can people follow or connect with you?
Yeah, sure. So, I run a company called Shaping Wealth. We are a global coaching and content platform. Our motto, or vision statement, to use the corporate speak, is funded contentment for everyone. We want to share in very practical terms what it means to achieve wealth as a mindset. And so we work with advisors and their clients on exactly that. And shapingwealth.com is our website, and a lot of information there about what we do and how we serve various communities all over the world.
Perfect. I appreciate you being on today, Brian. Thank you.
Great conversation. Thanks, Joe.
Thank you for joining us for this latest episode of Your Retirement Planning Simplified. Be sure to tune back in for the next episode. And until then, we're here to help you simplify and succeed in your retirement planning.